What if I told you that buried within ancient stories about farmers and coins lies the blueprint for your destiny? Jesus spoke in parables for a reason, to hide truth in plain sight, separating those who merely hear from those who truly see. The religious leaders of his time stood right in front of him, yet remained blind. The outcasts and sinners, they discovered mysteries that shook eternity. Here's the unsettling truth. These parables weren't meant to make you comfortable. They were designed to expose what's hidden in your heart, to challenge everything you thought you knew about God, success, and salvation. Some of these stories will make you uncomfortable. Others will shatter your assumptions. A few might even change your life forever. For 2,000 years, these words have separated the seekers from the sleepers. Today, every parable Jesus ever spoke will be unveiled before your eyes. But I must warn you, once you truly understand what Jesus concealed in these stories, you can never see the world the same way again. The question is, are you ready for what's about to be revealed? Picture Jesus sitting by the lake, crowds pressing in from every direction. There are so many people that he can barely move. He steps into a boat, pushes off from shore just a bit, and begins to teach. His voice carries across the water as he tells them a story they all know too well. In Matthew 13, starting at verse 3, Jesus says a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he scattered it across the field, some seeds fell along the path. Before they could even settle into the soil, birds swooped down and ate them up. Nothing grew there, not a single sprout. The ground was too hard, too packed down from all the feet that had walked over it. The seed just sat on the surface, exposed, easy prey for the birds. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where the soil was thin. These seeds sprouted quickly because the soil was shallow and warmed up fast. You could see the green shoots pushing through within days. It looked promising at first, but when the sun rose and beat down on those young plants, they withered. Their roots had nowhere to go. The rock beneath them made it impossible to dig deep, and without deep roots they couldn't find water. They couldn't survive the heat. They died as quickly as they'd appeared, shriveling up under the relentless sun. Then there were seeds that fell among thorns. These actually started to grow. You could see green shoots pushing up through the earth, reaching for the sky. But as they grew, so did the thorns around them. The thorns grew faster, stronger, taller. They had deeper roots, tougher stems. They choked out the good plants, stealing their sunlight, their water, their space. The good plants couldn't compete. Eventually, those plants produced nothing at all. They withered and died, strangled by the thorns. But some seeds fell on good soil, deep, rich, fertile ground that had been worked and prepared. These seeds took root immediately, grew strong and healthy, and produced a crop. Verse 8 tells us that some produced 30 times what was planted, some 60 times, and some even 100 times more. Imagine planting one seed and getting back 100. That's extraordinary abundance. Then Jesus said something he would say often throughout his ministry: "Whoever has ears, let them hear." The crowds heard this story and walked away thinking about farming. Most of them were farmers themselves or new farmers. They understood seeds and soil and harvests. But the disciples knew there was more. They'd been with Jesus long enough to know his stories always went deeper. Later, when they came to Jesus privately, away from the crowds, they asked why he spoke in parables. Why not just say what he meant directly? Jesus explained in verse 11 that the secrets of the kingdom were given to them to know, but not to everyone. Some people have eyes but don't really see. They have ears but don't really hear. They look but don't perceive. They listen but don't understand. Then he told them what the parable really meant, unpacking each detail. In verse 19, Jesus said, "When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and doesn't understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart." That's the seed on the path. The birds represent how quickly truth can be stolen before it takes root. The word lands on hard ground, a heart that's been walked over so many times it can't receive anything new. Maybe it's been hurt too many times, disappointed too many times, hardened by life. The enemy moves fast, taking the message before it has any chance to settle in, before it can even begin to germinate. The seed on rocky ground, Jesus explained in verse 20, is the person who hears the word and receives it with joy right away. There's immediate excitement, instant enthusiasm. They're fired up, ready to go, telling everyone about what they've heard. But verse 21 says they have no root. They last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they fall away quickly. As soon as following Jesus costs them something, they're gone. Their faith was shallow, just like that thin soil. It looked promising at first, but there was no depth to sustain growth when things got hard. When the heat came, they couldn't handle it. The seed among thorns, according to verse 22, is someone who hears the word. But the worries of this life and the false promises of wealth choke it out. They become unfruitful. The things of this world strangle whatever growth began. Bills to pay, status to maintain, possessions to protect, career to advance. These concerns grow wild, taking over everything until the word is suffocated completely. It's not that they rejected the word. It's that they let everything else crowd it out until there was no room left for it to grow. But the seed on good soil, Jesus said in verse 23, is the person who hears the word and understands it. They produce a harvest, yielding 30, 60, or even 100 times what was sown. The difference isn't in the seed. The seed is the same in every case. The farmer throws the same seed everywhere, broadcasting it across the entire field. The difference is in the soil, in the heart, in how the word is received and what happens after it lands. The good soil receives it deeply, protects it, nourishes it, and lets it grow without interference. Jesus didn't wait long before telling another story. The crowds were still there, still listening. Right there in Matthew 13, starting at verse 24, he said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. Everything was planted correctly. The farmer did his job well. He used quality seed, prepared the ground properly, sowed at the right time, did everything by the book. But while everyone slept during the night, an enemy came. This wasn't a random accident. This enemy moved through the field intentionally in darkness and sowed weeds among the wheat. Then he disappeared into the night, leaving no trace. No one saw him. No one knew what had happened until it was too late. Days passed, weeks passed. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads of grain, the weeds appeared too. They grew right alongside the good crop, mixed together, tangled up with each other, almost indistinguishable in the early stages. The servants came to the owner, confused and concerned, and probably a little angry. They said in verse 27, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" They knew their master. He was careful, thorough. This didn't make sense. The owner immediately understood what had happened. "An enemy did this," he replied in verse 28. He knew this wasn't an accident or bad seed or poor farming technique. This was sabotage, intentional destruction, an act of malice. Someone wanted to ruin his harvest. The servants, eager to fix the problem and protect the crop, asked if they should go and pull up the weeds right away. They were ready to get out there immediately and start ripping out every weed they could find, working through the whole field if necessary. But the owner said no. In verse 29, he told them, "If you pull the weeds now, you might uproot the wheat with them." The roots were tangled together underground where no one could see. What looks separate above ground is often connected below the surface. The wheat and the weeds had grown up together, their roots intertwining in the soil. Trying to separate them now would damage the good crop. You'd end up destroying what you're trying to protect. You'd lose wheat while pulling weeds. Instead, he gave them different instructions in verse 30. "Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I'll tell the harvesters to collect the weeds first and tie them in bundles to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." The disciples heard this story along with everyone else in the crowd, but they didn't fully understand it. It seemed straightforward on the surface, but they knew Jesus meant something more. Later, after Jesus sent the crowds away, they came to him in private, just the 12 of them. In verse 36, they asked him directly to explain the parable of the weeds in the field. They needed to know what it meant. They needed to understand what Jesus was really saying. Jesus broke it down for them piece by piece, making it crystal clear. The one who sowed the good seed, he said in verse 37, is the Son of Man. That's Jesus himself, planting truth, building his kingdom. The field is the world, not just Israel, not just one nation or one group of people, but the entire world. The good seed stands for the people of the kingdom, those who truly belong to God, who have received the word and are growing in it. But the weeds are the people of the evil one, verse 38 says, and the enemy who sows them is the devil himself. He's the one who came in darkness, who plants destruction among what's good, who works to undermine everything God is doing. The harvest, Jesus explained in verse 39, is the end of the age, that final moment when time as we know it stops and eternity begins. And the harvesters are angels, God's messengers, who will carry out his commands perfectly. There's a set time coming when everything will be sorted out, when the waiting will be over. Jesus continued in verse 40, explaining that just as the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, verse 41 says, and they will remove from his kingdom everything that causes sin and everyone who does evil. They won't miss anything. They won't make mistakes. They'll throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and grinding of teeth. Then verse 43 says, the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. The separation is coming, but the owner has decided to wait until harvest. Both grow together for now. Jesus kept teaching about the kingdom, piling story upon story, giving them image after image. In Matthew 13, verse 31, he told them another parable. He said, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that a man took and planted in his field. Now, anyone who worked with plants knew about mustard seeds. They were tiny, almost impossibly small, barely visible. Verse 32 says it's the smallest of all seeds. You could hold dozens of them in your palm and barely feel their weight. If you dropped one in the dirt, you might never find it again. It didn't look impressive. It didn't look like anything that could amount to something significant. It certainly didn't look like the beginning of something great, but when that tiny seed was planted in good soil and started to grow, something remarkable happened. It grew and kept growing until it became the largest of garden plants. It didn't just grow a little bigger than other plants. It grew beyond all proportion to its beginning, dwarfing everything around it. It turned into a tree big enough and strong enough that birds came and perched in its branches. They made nests there, raised their young there, found shelter there from storms and predators. What started almost invisible, what could barely be seen, became something that couldn't be missed, something massive, something that provided shade and safety and a home for many. Jesus immediately told them yet another short parable, not giving them time to fully process the last one. This one is in Matthew 13, verse 33. He said, the kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour. That's a massive amount of dough, enough to feed well over 100 people. This wasn't a small batch for one family's dinner. This was bread for a feast, for a wedding, for a major celebration. The woman took just a small amount of yeast, maybe a handful, and worked it through all that flour, kneading it in thoroughly, spreading it throughout the entire batch. Here's what makes this parable so powerful. You can't see yeast working. It's invisible. You mix it in, and then you wait. You can't watch the process happen. Hidden inside that dough, completely invisible to the eye, the yeast is spreading, multiplying, transforming, causing the whole batch to rise. Hours pass. You come back, and the dough has doubled in size. You didn't see it happen moment by moment. You can't track the yeast moving through the flour. You just see the result when the work is done. What started as a small amount of yeast changed everything it touched from the inside out. It didn't work from the outside in, adding layers or coating the surface. It worked invisibly, quietly, slowly, but completely and thoroughly. Every part of that massive batch of dough was affected and transformed by that small amount of yeast. Nothing remained unchanged. In Matthew 13, verse 44, Jesus told a story about a man walking through a field. This field didn't belong to him. He had no claim to it, no ownership, no rights to anything on it. He was just passing through, maybe working there as a day laborer for someone else, just doing ordinary work on what seemed like an ordinary day. Maybe he was plowing or digging irrigation ditches. Then suddenly, completely unexpectedly, his tool hit something solid, something that wasn't a rock. He dug a little more carefully now and found treasure hidden in the field. We're not told what kind of treasure: gold, silver, jewels, coins. We're not told how it got there or how long it had been buried. Maybe someone hid it during a war and never came back for it. Maybe it had been there for generations, forgotten, waiting to be found. But the moment this man discovered it, in that instant, everything changed for him. His whole world shifted. The man's heart must have been racing. His hands probably shook as he uncovered it. He looked at what he'd found and knew immediately that this was valuable beyond measure. This wasn't just a little extra money or a nice bonus. This was life-changing wealth. This was enough to transform his entire existence. So what did he do? He didn't tell anyone. He didn't run to the owner of the field. He hid it again, quickly, carefully. He covered it back up, making sure it looked undisturbed, making sure no one else would notice anything unusual. He looked around to see if anyone was watching, if anyone had seen what he found. Then, filled with joy, probably barely able to contain his excitement, he went and sold everything he had, every possession, every item of value. His house, his tools, his animals, his furniture, his extra clothes. He liquidated it all, turned everything into cash, and bought that field. He didn't buy the field because he wanted to be a farmer. He didn't buy it for the soil quality or the location. He bought it because he knew what was underneath. The treasure buried there was worth more than everything he owned combined, and he knew it without a doubt. There was no hesitation, no second guessing, no wondering if he should keep something back just in case. He saw the value clearly and gave up everything else to possess it. Right after that, in Matthew 13, verse 45, Jesus told another similar story, but with an important difference. This time, it was about a merchant who was looking for fine pearls. This wasn't someone who accidentally stumbled on something while doing other work. This was his profession, his life's work. This was a professional dealer, someone who knew quality, someone who had spent his entire career searching for valuable pearls, buying and selling them, building expertise. He knew what to look for. He understood worth at a glance. He could tell the difference between a good pearl and a great one just by looking at it. He'd probably seen thousands of pearls in his lifetime, handled them, examined them, bought and sold many of them, built up wealth through his knowledge and skill. One day, this experienced merchant, who thought he'd seen everything, found one pearl of extraordinary value, something unlike anything he'd encountered before. Verse 46 says that when he discovered it, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. Just like the man with the hidden treasure, this merchant recognized immediately that what he'd found was worth more than his entire life's collection. Every pearl he currently owned, every bit of his inventory that he'd accumulated over years, all his wealth built up through successful trading, none of it compared to this one pearl. This single pearl outvalued everything else combined. He didn't hesitate. He didn't try to negotiate a better price or find a way to acquire it while keeping his other assets. He didn't think about keeping some backup wealth in case this turned out to be a mistake. He gave up everything to possess this one pearl. His whole life had been spent preparing him to recognize this moment, and when it came, he knew exactly what to do without doubt or delay. Jesus continued teaching in Matthew 13, and in verse 47, he gave them another picture of the kingdom, another way to understand how things work. He said the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the lake. The fishermen cast it wide, letting it sink deep into the water, and it caught all kinds of fish. Everything that swam into that net got pulled in, trapped in the mesh. Good fish, bad fish, valuable fish, worthless fish, big ones, small ones, clean ones, unclean ones, fish that could be eaten and fish that couldn't. The net didn't discriminate. It didn't choose or select. It just gathered everything in its path, sweeping through the water and collecting whatever was there. When the net was full, heavy with the catch, verse 48 says, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore. This was hard work, dragging that heavy net full of squirming fish out of the water and onto the beach. Their muscles strained as they hauled it in. Then they sat down and began the careful work of sorting. They collected the good fish in baskets, carefully selecting the ones that could be sold at market or eaten, the ones that were valuable. But the bad fish, they threw those away without hesitation. They separated them, keeping what was valuable and discarding what wasn't worth keeping. The fishermen knew the difference instantly. They'd done this their whole lives. One glance, and they knew which basket each fish belonged in. Then Jesus asked his disciples something important in verse 51. Have you understood all these things? The disciples said yes, they understood. But Jesus wanted to make absolutely sure they got the point of this particular parable, so he explained it. He said in verse 49 that this is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous, just like those fishermen sitting on the shore sorting their catch, just like them examining each fish and deciding its fate. The angels will sort people. Verse 50 says, they'll throw the wicked into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and grinding of teeth. The gathering happens first, catching all kinds. The sorting comes later, at the end. Mark 4 verse 26 gives us another parable about seeds that Jesus told, one that appears only in Mark's account. He said the kingdom of God is like a man who scatters seed on the ground. The farmer does his part. He prepares the soil, breaks up the clods, removes the rocks, throws the seed, covers it properly. He does everything he's supposed to do, everything farmers have always done. Then he goes about his normal life. He doesn't sit in the field watching. Night and day, whether he's sleeping in his bed or awake, eating dinner with his family or working on other tasks, repairing his tools or tending his animals, the seed sprouts and grows. But here's the amazing, mysterious thing. He doesn't know how it happens. Verse 28 says, the soil produces grain by itself, automatically. First the stalk appears, a tiny green shoot pushing up through the dirt. Then the head forms at the top of the stalk. Then the full kernel develops in the head, filling out and maturing. Stage by stage, day by day, the plant grows through its natural progression. The farmer isn't out there making it grow. He's not pulling on the shoots to make them taller or forcing the kernels to develop. He can't speed it up by worrying about it. He can't control the process or dictate the timeline. Growth happens on its own, through a process mysterious and powerful that he can't control or fully understand, a process built into creation itself. He plants, he waits, he trusts. He watches but doesn't intervene. All he knows is that it works. It's always worked this way. Seeds become plants, plants produce grain. That's just how it is. That's how God designed it. Then, as soon as the grain is ripe, when it reaches that perfect moment of readiness, verse 29 says he puts the sickle to it because the harvest has come. The farmer waits patiently through all those mysterious stages of growth, trusts the process he doesn't understand, watches for the signs of ripeness. And when the time is exactly right, when the grain is ready and not before, he doesn't wait another day. He harvests immediately what has grown. The growth was beyond his control, mysterious and divine, but the harvest is his responsibility and his joy. Jesus was at a Pharisee's house for dinner when something unexpected happened. A woman known in the town as a sinner came in, bringing an alabaster jar of perfume. She stood behind Jesus at his feet crying. Her tears fell on his feet, and she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. The Pharisee who invited Jesus saw this and thought to himself that if Jesus were really a prophet, he would know what kind of woman was touching him. He was judging both the woman and Jesus in his mind. Jesus turned to him and said he had something to tell him. The Pharisee said to go ahead, probably curious about what Jesus would say. So in Luke 7, starting at verse 41, Jesus told him a story. He said 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii. That's about a year and a half worth of wages for a working man. Imagine working every single day for 18 months, and that's how much this person owed. The other owed 50 denarii, about a month and a half of work. Still a significant amount, but nowhere near what the first person owed. Neither of them had the money to pay him back. They were both broke, both stuck, both facing the consequences of their debts. Verse 42 says that since neither could pay, he forgave the debts of both. He cancelled them completely. He didn't ask for a payment plan. He didn't demand they sell their possessions. He didn't take them to court. He just wiped the debts clean, wrote them off entirely. Both men walked away, owing nothing. Then Jesus asked Simon the Pharisee a simple question. Now which of them will love him more? Simon answered, verse 43 tells us, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. It was obvious, really. Jesus said, you have judged correctly. The one who was forgiven more would naturally love more. The one who was let off the hook for a massive debt would feel more gratitude, more relief, more overwhelming thankfulness than the one whose smaller debt was cancelled. It's just basic human nature. Then Jesus turned the whole conversation toward the woman weeping at his feet, showing Simon that she understood something about forgiveness that he didn't. She'd been forgiven much, and her love showed it. Peter came to Jesus one day with a question about forgiveness. He asked in Matthew 18, verse 21, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Peter probably thought he was being incredibly generous. The religious teachers of his day said 3 times was enough. 3 strikes and you're out, but 7 times. That seemed really gracious, way above and beyond what was expected. Jesus answered him in verse 22, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. In other words, stop counting altogether. Forgiveness isn't about keeping score. Then Jesus told a parable to explain exactly why this matters so much. In verse 23, Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. 10,000 talents. That's an absolutely staggering amount of money. It would take a working man literally thousands of years to earn that much. Some scholars estimate it would be equivalent to millions of dollars today. It's more money than most people could even wrap their minds around. This wasn't a debt that could be repaid. This was impossible debt, unimaginable debt. Verse 25 says, since the servant couldn't pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. Even selling everything wouldn't come close to covering what he owed, but it was the standard practice. The servant would lose everything. His whole family would be torn apart and sold into slavery. Their lives would be destroyed. Desperate and terrified, verse 26 tells us the servant fell on his knees before the king. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. It was an impossible promise. He could never, ever pay it back. He'd need multiple lifetimes. But he said it anyway, grasping at anything, any hope of avoiding this fate. The servant's master took pity on him. Verse 27 says he canceled the debt and let him go. Not a payment plan, not a reduced amount, not pay me what you can. Complete cancellation. The whole impossible, unpayable debt wiped out entirely, gone. The servant walked away a free man, owing nothing. Can you imagine that feeling? That weightlifting? That moment of realizing you're free? You'd think that kind of mercy would change someone forever. You'd think he'd never forget what had just happened to him. You'd think he'd be a different person. But verse 28 says that when that same servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. 100 denarii, that's about 3 months of wages. It's real money, sure. It's not nothing. but it's absolutely nothing compared to what he'd just been forgiven. It's like comparing a few $1,000s to millions. He grabbed this fellow servant by the throat and started choking him. "Pay back what you owe me," he demanded violently. His fellow servant fell to his knees, verse 29 says, and begged him, "Be patient with me and I will pay it back." The exact same words. The exact same plea he himself had made just moments ago. The exact same desperate request for mercy. But the servant who'd just been forgiven millions refused to forgive thousands. His heart was completely unchanged by the mercy he'd received. Verse 30 tells us he refused and went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. He showed zero mercy, zero compassion, zero willingness to forgive even a fraction of what he'd been forgiven. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and greatly distressed. This was wrong and they knew it. Verse 31 says, they went and told their master everything that had taken place. The master called the unmerciful servant back in. You can imagine the anger on the king's face. Verse 32 records exactly what he said. "You wicked servant, I cancelled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?" It wasn't a complicated question. The answer was obvious. The master was furious. Verse 34 says, in anger, he handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed, which meant forever because he could never pay it back. The debt was reinstated. The mercy was revoked. The forgiveness was cancelled. Jesus ended the parable in verse 35 by saying something sobering. "This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart." Not just with words, but from your heart. Real forgiveness. In Matthew 20 verse 1, Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day, which was the normal fair daily wage, and sent them into his vineyard to work. That was around 6 in the morning, right at first light when the workday began. These workers knew exactly what they'd earn. They agreed to the terms and went to work. About 9 in the morning, verse 3 says, he went out again and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. They were waiting, hoping someone would hire them. He told them to go work in his vineyard too, and he'd pay them whatever was right. He didn't specify the amount. He just said he'd be fair. So they trusted him and went. Around noon, he went out again and did the same thing. Then again at 3 in the afternoon. Each time, he found people standing around with no work and sent them to his vineyard. Verse 6 tells us that about 5 in the afternoon, just an hour before quitting time, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" They answered, "Because no one has hired us." It wasn't that they were lazy. They'd been there all day, available, waiting. Nobody wanted them. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." So they went, even though there was only about an hour of work left in the day. They couldn't earn much in 1 hour, but something was better than nothing. When evening came, verse 8 says, the owner of the vineyard told his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." This is interesting. He started with the people who'd worked the least. The workers who were hired about 5 o'clock came first, and each received a denarius, a full day's wage, for 1 hour of work. They must have been shocked, amazed, incredibly grateful. So when those came who were hired first, the ones who'd been there since dawn, verse 10 tells us they expected to receive more. It made sense, right? If the 1 hour workers got a full day's pay, surely those who worked 12 hours would get much more. But each one of them also received a denarius, exactly the same amount as everyone else, the same as the people who'd worked 1 hour. When they received it, verse 11 says, they began to grumble against the landowner. They weren't just disappointed, they were angry. Verse 12 records their complaint word for word. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." They'd been out there in the blazing sun since morning. They'd worked through the hottest part of the day. They'd put in 12 full hours of hard labor. And these latecomers who worked one easy hour in the cool evening got the same pay. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. The owner answered one of them in verse 13. He called him friend, staying calm and reasonable. I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? That's the real issue right there. The landowner wasn't being unfair. He kept his agreement perfectly. Every worker got what was promised. But his generosity to others made the first workers angry. They compared themselves to others and felt cheated, even though they received exactly what they'd agreed to work for. Their problem wasn't with their pay. Their problem was with his generosity to people they thought deserved less. Jesus concluded in verse 16, "So the last will be first, and the first will be last." The people who thought they deserved the most got the same as those who deserved the least. That's grace. In Luke 15, verse 11, Jesus said there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one came to his father one day with an outrageous request. He said, "Father, give me my share of the estate." In that culture, this was incredibly insulting. He was basically saying he wished his father were dead. Inheritance comes after death. But he wanted his now. He wanted to cash out and leave. Verse 12 says the father divided his property between them. He gave the younger son what he asked for, even though it must have broken his heart. Not long after that, the younger son gathered all he had and set off for a distant country. He didn't just move to the next town. He wanted to get as far away as possible from his father, his family, his home, everything he'd known. Verse 13 says there he squandered his wealth in wild living. He spent everything on parties, pleasure, whatever felt good in the moment. He lived it up, probably thinking this would last forever. But money runs out, especially when you're spending it on nothing of value. When he'd spent everything, verse 14 says, a severe famine hit that whole country, and he began to be in need, real desperate need. The kind where you don't know where your next meal is coming from. He'd gone from wealthy to broke to starving. Verse 15 tells us he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. This is about as low as a Jewish boy could go. Pigs were unclean animals. Being around them made you unclean. Just touching them went against everything he'd been taught. But he was so desperate, so hungry, he took the job anyway. Verse 16 says, he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. He was starving, literally starving, and even the pig food looked good to him. He would have eaten it if they'd let him, but they wouldn't even give him that. This boy who'd had everything now had less than nothing. When he came to his senses, verse 17 says, he started thinking clearly for the first time in a while. He thought about his father's house. Even his father's hired servants had food to spare, and here he was starving to death. Why was he dying out here when servants back home had plenty? So he made a decision. Verse 18 records his plan. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. He practiced his speech, word by word. He wasn't going back expecting to be a son again. That relationship was destroyed. He just hoped his father might hire him as a servant. That would be enough. That would be better than starving with the pigs. So he got up and went to his father. He started the long journey home, probably rehearsing his speech the whole way, preparing for rejection, hoping for the bare minimum. But while he was still a long way off, verse 20 says, his father saw him. His father must have been watching the road day after day, hoping, waiting for his son to come home. And when he saw that figure in the distance, he knew the father was filled with compassion for him. His heart broke with love for this son who'd broken his heart. And then the father did something unthinkable. He ran. A Middle Eastern father didn't run. It wasn't dignified. It wasn't proper. But this father didn't care about dignity. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son started his speech in verse 21. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father wasn't listening to speeches. He wasn't interested in the boy working his way back into the family. Verse 22 says the father told his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet." The best robe, not work clothes. A ring, a symbol of authority and family. Sandals, because servants went barefoot but sons wore shoes. Every item declared, "You're my son." Then verse 23, "Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate." The fattened calf was saved for the most special occasions. This was extravagant celebration. The father explained why in verse 24, "For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found," and they began to celebrate. Music, dancing, feasting. The whole household rejoiced. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field, working like he did every day. Verse 25 says, when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. Something was going on. He called one of the servants and asked what was happening. The servant told him in verse 27, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry, verse 28 says. Furious, actually. And he refused to go in. He wouldn't join the party, wouldn't celebrate. His father came out and pleaded with him, begging him to come in. But the older son exploded. Verse 29 records his bitter words, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." Notice he said, "This son of yours, not my brother." He was distancing himself. And he was keeping score of everything he'd done right and everything his brother had done wrong. He'd been faithful, obedient, hardworking, and what did he get? Nothing special. But the screw-up comes home and gets a party? The father said to him in verse 31, speaking gently, lovingly, "My son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." The father called him "my son" and called the younger son "your brother," reminding him of their relationships. And he explained, we had to celebrate. There was no choice. When someone lost comes home, when someone dead comes back to life, you celebrate. Jesus told this next parable in Luke 18 verse 9, specifically to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else. These were people who thought they had it all figured out spiritually. They knew they were right with God because of what they did, and they knew others weren't. Jesus wanted to challenge that thinking completely. He said, 2 men went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, a religious leader, someone respected in the community. The other was a tax collector, someone everyone hated. Tax collectors worked for Rome, collected money from their own people, and usually charged extra to line their own pockets. They were considered traitors and thieves. These 2 men went to the same place to pray, but they couldn't have been more different. The Pharisee stood by himself, verse 11 tells us. He separated himself from everyone else, positioning himself where people could see him. And he prayed about himself. His prayer went like this: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. He started by comparing himself to others, listing all the things he wasn't. Then verse 12, he listed what he was. I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get. His prayer was essentially a list of his accomplishments, his superiority, how much better he was than everyone else around him, especially that tax collector over there. He pointed out everything he did right, every religious duty he performed beyond what was required. He fasted twice a week when the law only required 1 fast per year. He tithed everything, even garden herbs. He was proud of his righteousness, standing tall, making sure God and everyone else knew how good he was. But the tax collector, verse 13 says, stood at a distance. He stayed far away from others, knowing he wasn't worthy to come closer. He wouldn't even look up to heaven. He kept his eyes down, ashamed. And he beat his breast, a sign of deep grief and repentance. His prayer was short and desperate. God, have mercy on me, a sinner. That was it. 7 words in English. No list of accomplishments because he had none. No comparison to others because he knew he was the worst. No elaborate religious language. Just a desperate, honest cry for mercy. He knew he had nothing to offer, nothing to boast about, nothing to bring God except his broken, sinful self. He could only throw himself on God's mercy and hope. Jesus said something shocking in verse 14. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. Not the Pharisee who did everything right, the tax collector, the sinner, the one everyone despised. He went home right with God. Then Jesus explained the principle. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. The one who lifted himself up went home unjustified. The one who humbled himself went home justified. Everything was backwards from what people expected. The Pharisees and teachers of the law were grumbling because Jesus welcomed sinners and actually ate with them. They couldn't understand why a religious teacher would associate with such people. So in Luke 15, starting at verse 3, Jesus told them this parable. He said, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? Think about that situation for a second. You have 100 sheep. 99 are safe, accounted for, right where they should be. One wandered off. The logical, sensible thing would be to stay with the 99. You've got most of your flock. You're doing well. Cut your losses. One sheep isn't worth risking the other 99. But that's not what this shepherd does. He doesn't calculate the odds or think about what makes practical sense. He leaves the 99 and goes after the one that's lost. He searches until he finds it. Not if he finds it, until he finds it. He doesn't give up. He won't stop looking. Verse 5 says, when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders. The sheep is probably exhausted from wandering, maybe hurt, definitely unable to walk all the way back on its own. So the shepherd doesn't make it walk. He carries it. He puts it on his shoulders and carries it home himself. And when he gets home, verse 6 says he calls his friends and neighbors together. He gathers everyone and says, rejoice with me. I have found my lost sheep. He's so happy he can't keep it to himself. He has to share his joy with everyone around him. Jesus told them in verse 7, I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Heaven throws a party over one lost person who comes home. One person, not 100, not even 10. One person matters that much. One lost sheep found causes more joy than 99 who never left. Right after telling them about the lost sheep, Jesus told another story with the same theme. In Luke 15, verse 8, he said, or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? These coins were valuable. Each one was a day's wage. Losing one meant losing 10% of what she had, a significant loss. So she doesn't just give up and accept it. She takes action immediately. She lights a lamp because houses back then had small windows and were probably pretty dark inside. She gets her broom and sweeps thoroughly, carefully, moving furniture, checking every corner, looking in every crack and crevice. She searches carefully, methodically, completely determined to find that coin. She won't stop until it's found. Verse 9 says when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together, just like the shepherd did. And she says, rejoice with me. I have found my lost coin. She's so happy, so relieved, so excited that she has to share it with others. She gathers people together to celebrate finding one coin. Then Jesus made the connection in verse 10. In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Again, that emphasis on one. One lost coin found causes celebration. One sinner who repents causes the angels of God to rejoice. The religious leaders were grumbling about Jesus spending time with sinners, but heaven celebrates when those sinners come home. Jesus was showing them that their values were completely backwards from heaven's values. In Matthew 22, verse 2, Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son." This was a major event, a royal wedding. The king would spare no expense. He prepared everything, got the best food, the best wine, made sure everything was perfect. Then verse 3 says, he sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come. This wasn't a last-minute invitation. These people had been invited previously. They knew about it. Now the servants were sent to tell them everything was ready. It was time to come, but they refused to come. They just said no. Can you imagine? The king invites you to his son's wedding and you refuse. So the king tried again. Verse 4 says he sent some more servants with a more detailed message. "Tell those who have been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fattened cattle have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet." He was emphasizing that the feast was prepared, the best food was ready, everything was perfect. All they had to do was show up, but verse 5 says they paid no attention. They didn't even care. They went off to their own things, one to his field, another to his business. They had their own priorities, their own interests, and the king's invitation didn't matter to them. Even worse, verse 6 tells us the rest seized his servants, the ones bringing the invitation, and they mistreated them and killed them. They didn't just decline politely, they attacked and murdered the messengers. It was an act of total rebellion and disrespect. The king was enraged, understandably. Verse 7 says he sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. They'd rejected his invitation, killed his servants, and now they faced the consequences. But the king still wanted his son's wedding hall to be full. The banquet was ready. Someone was going to enjoy it. So verse 8 says the king told his servants, "The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. So go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find, anyone. Not the elite, not the important people, not the ones who seemed worthy, just anyone who would come." Verse 10 says, the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good. And the wedding hall was filled with guests, people who never expected an invitation, people who would never have been on the original guest list, people from the streets, the forgotten, the overlooked. They all came in and the wedding hall was filled. Then verse 11 says, when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. In that culture, wedding clothes would have been provided by the host. Everyone who came would have been given proper clothes to wear to the feast. This man was there, but he hadn't put on what was provided. He came on his own terms. The king asked him in verse 12, "How did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend?" The man was speechless. He had no answer, no excuse. Then verse 13 says, the king told the attendants, "Tie him hand and foot, and throw him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." The invitation was open to everyone, but there were still requirements. You had to accept what the king provided. You had to come properly prepared. Jesus concluded this parable in verse 14 with one simple statement. For many are invited, but few are chosen. The invitation goes out widely, but not everyone who receives it responds properly. Grace is free, but it's not cheap. It requires something of us. Jesus had just finished teaching what we call the Sermon on the Mount. He'd covered everything from how to pray to how to treat your enemies. Now, in Matthew 7, verse 24, he was wrapping up with a story that would drive home the importance of everything he'd just said. He said, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock." This wise builder didn't just start throwing up walls wherever seemed convenient. He looked at the land and made a decision. He dug down deep. He kept digging past the soil, past the loose earth, until he hit solid rock. That rock was down there somewhere, but it took effort to reach it. It was hard work, time-consuming work, expensive work. It would have been so much easier to skip this step and just build on the surface. Nobody would know the difference from looking at the finished house. But this builder knew what was coming. He knew storms would come eventually. They always do. So he built his foundation on rock no matter what it cost. Then verse 25 describes what happened when the test came. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. Everything nature could throw at a structure hit that house. Rain poured down from above, heavy rain that wouldn't stop. Streams rose from below, flooding from the ground up. Winds slammed against it from every side, howling winds that tested every wall. It was the perfect storm, the worst possible conditions. The kind of storm that destroys things. But the house stood firm. It didn't crack. It didn't shift. The foundation held strong, and because the foundation held, everything built on it held too. Then Jesus described another builder in verse 26. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. Notice something important. This builder also built a house. He didn't do nothing. He worked hard. He constructed walls and a roof. From the outside, it probably looked just as nice as the first house. Same size, same style, maybe even prettier. You couldn't tell by looking which house was built on rock and which on sand. But there was a critical difference. This builder took the easy route. He built on sand. No foundation. No digging down to rock. He just built on the surface because it was easier, faster, cheaper. Verse 27 tells what happened when the test came. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. The same storm hit both houses. Exactly the same rain, same floods, same winds. But this house couldn't handle it. When the floods rose, the sand underneath began to wash away. The house had nothing solid holding it up. It shifted, tilted, and fell. And it didn't just fall quietly. It fell with a great crash. Complete destruction. Jesus made the point clear. Hearing his words isn't enough. Listening to teaching isn't enough. You have to put it into practice. You have to actually do what he says. You have to build your life on his words. Because when the storms come, and they will come, that's what will determine whether you stand or fall. In Matthew 25 verse 1, Jesus told another story about being ready. He said, "At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom." These were bridesmaids, young women who were part of the wedding party. In that culture, the groom would come to get his bride, and there would be a procession through the streets to the wedding feast. The bridesmaids' job was to wait for the groom, and then join the procession with their lamps lit, lighting the way through the dark streets. Verse 2 tells us that 5 were foolish and 5 were wise. What made the difference? The foolish ones, verse 3 says, took their lamps but didn't take any extra oil with them. They had what they needed for right now, but no backup, no reserve, no preparation for delays. The wise ones, verse 4 says, took oil in jars along with their lamps. They brought extra. They thought ahead. They prepared for the unexpected. The bridegroom was a long time in coming. Nobody expected this, but for whatever reason, he was delayed. Verse 5 says all the virgins became drowsy and fell asleep. Notice that all 10 fell asleep, the wise and the foolish. They all got tired waiting. Being wise didn't mean staying awake all night. It meant being prepared when the moment came. At midnight, right in the middle of the night, the shout came, "Here's the bridegroom. Come out to meet him." Everyone jolted awake. All the virgins woke up, verse 7 says, and began to trim their lamps. They got their lamps ready, adjusting the wicks, making sure they'd burn bright. But the foolish ones suddenly realized they had a problem. Their lamps were going out. They were running out of oil, and the bridegroom was here. They said to the wise ones in verse 8, "Give us some of your oil. Our lamps are going out." But the wise virgins replied in verse 9, "No, there may not be enough for both us and you. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves." This wasn't selfishness. It was reality. If they divided the oil among all 10, none would have enough. Each person needed their own supply. Some things can't be shared at the last minute. While the foolish virgins were on their way to buy oil, verse 10 says, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet. and the door was shut, locked, the feast had begun. Later the others came. Verse 11 records them standing outside knocking. "Lord, Lord," they said, "open the door for us." But he replied in verse 12, "Truly I tell you, I don't know you." The door stayed shut. They'd been part of the wedding party. They'd been waiting. But when the moment came, they weren't ready. Jesus concluded in verse 13, "Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour." Jesus told another parable in Matthew 25, starting at verse 14. He said, "A man going on a journey called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2, and to another 1." Verse 15 tells us each according to his ability. He knew his servants. He knew what each could handle. Then he went on his journey, leaving them in charge. The man who received 5 bags didn't waste time. Verse 16 says, he went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. He took what his master gave him and doubled it. The one with 2 bags did the same. He gained 2 more. Both servants were active, faithful, productive, but the man who received 1 bag took a different approach. Verse 18 says he went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. He didn't invest it, didn't use it, didn't risk it. He just kept it safe and waited. After a long time, verse 19 says, the master returned and settled accounts. Time to see what they'd done. The man with 5 bags came and brought the other 5. He said in verse 20, "Master, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more." His master replied in verse 21, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." Praise, promotion, and relationship. The man with 2 bags came next. He brought his profit. His master said the exact same thing in verse 23, same praise, same promotion. It didn't matter that he started with less. What mattered was faithfulness. Then the man who received 1 bag came. Verse 24 records his excuse. "Master, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you." He blamed his master's character for his inaction. He returned the original amount, thinking that should be enough. The master wasn't pleased. Verse 26 says, "You wicked, lazy servant, so you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest." Even if he was afraid, he could have at least put it in the bank. But he did nothing. Then verse 28 says, "Take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. The one who did nothing lost even what he had." Verse 29 explains, "For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have, will be taken from them." Then verse 30, "And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." In Matthew 24, verse 45, Jesus asked a question. "Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time?" He was describing a servant given authority over others. This servant's job was to take care of the household, make sure everyone was fed, manage things properly. Verse 46 says, "It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. If the master comes back and finds this servant faithfully carrying out his responsibilities, that servant will be blessed." Verse 47 tells us, "Truly I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions." Faithful service leads to greater responsibility. But what if the servant doesn't stay faithful? Verse 48 presents another scenario. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, "My master is staying away a long time." He thinks his master is delayed. He thinks he has time. He thinks no one is watching. So verse 49 says he begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards. He abuses his authority. He mistreats the people he's supposed to care for. He indulges himself instead of doing his job. The master of that servant, verse 50 says, will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he is not aware of. The master returns suddenly without warning. Verse 51 tells what happens. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The punishment is severe. The servant who abused his position faces judgment. In Luke 19, verse 11, people thought the kingdom of God was going to appear right away. So Jesus told them a parable. He said a man of noble birth went to a distant country to have himself appointed king and then to return. Before he left, verse 13 says, he called 10 servants and gave them 10 minas. A mina was about 3 months' wages. He told them, put this money to work until I come back. Then he left. But his subjects hated him. Verse 14 says, and sent a delegation after him to say, we don't want this man to be our king. They rejected him outright. Still, he was made king anyway, verse 15 tells us, and he returned home. Then he sent for the servants to find out what they had gained. The first one came and said in verse 16, Sir, your mina has earned 10 more. 1 mina had become 11. He'd multiplied it 10 times. The king said to him in verse 17, Well done, my good servant. Because you have been trustworthy in a very small matter, take charge of 10 cities. Faithful with a little money, so now he gets to govern 10 cities. Massive promotion. The second came and said in verse 18, Sir, your mina has earned 5 more. His master answered in verse 19, You take charge of 5 cities. Again, faithful service led to huge responsibility. Then another servant came. Verse 20 records what he said, Sir, here is your mina. I have kept it laid away in a piece of cloth. I was afraid of you because you are a hard man. You take out what you did not put in and reap what you did not sow. He wrapped it up, hid it, did nothing with it. He blamed his fear for his inaction. His master replied in verse 22, I will judge you by your own words, you wicked servant. You knew, did you, that I am a hard man, taking out what I did not put in and reaping what I did not sow? Why then didn't you put my money on deposit so that when I came back I could have collected it with interest? If he really believed the master was harsh, that should have motivated him to do something. But he did nothing. Then verse 24 says, The king told those standing by, Take his mina away from him and give it to the one who has 10 minas. The servants objected in verse 25, Sir, he already has 10. But the king replied in verse 26, I tell you that to everyone who has, more will be given. But as for the one who has nothing, even what they have will be taken away. Jesus was teaching his disciples about being ready. In Luke 12 verse 35 he told them, Be dressed ready for service and keep your lamps burning, like servants ready to work at any moment, with their robes tucked up and lamps lit, always ready, always alert. Verse 36 says, Be like servants waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet, so that when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door for him. These servants don't know exactly when the master will return, but they're waiting, watching, ready to respond the instant he arrives. Then Jesus said something surprising in verse 37. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes. Truly, I tell you, he will dress himself to serve, will have them recline at the table and will come and wait on them. The master serves the servants. Complete reversal. The faithful servants who stayed ready received this incredible honor. Verse 38 continues, It will be good for those servants whose master finds them ready, even if he comes in the middle of the night or toward daybreak. The timing doesn't matter. The readiness matters. Then Jesus made the point clear in verse 39, But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You don't know when a thief will come. If you knew, you'd be ready, but you don't know, so you have to always be ready. Verse 40 says, You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. In Luke 13, verse 6, Jesus told a parable about a man who had a fig tree planted in his vineyard. He came looking for fruit on it but didn't find any. This wasn't the first time. Verse 7 says, he told the man who took care of the vineyard, "For 3 years now, I've been coming to look for fruit on this fig tree and haven't found any. Cut it down! Why should it use up the soil? 3 years is a long time to wait. 3 growing seasons with no fruit. The tree was taking up space, using nutrients, drawing water, and giving nothing back. It was useless. From the owner's perspective, it needed to go. But the gardener replied in verse 8, "Sir, leave it alone for 1 more year, and I'll dig around it and fertilize it. Give it 1 more chance." He'd work the soil, add nutrients, do everything possible to help it produce. Verse 9 says, "If it bears fruit next year, fine. If not, then cut it down 1 more year, 1 more opportunity." The gardener was willing to invest more time and effort. But there was a limit. If the tree still didn't produce after all that care, then it would be cut down. The patience wasn't endless. In Mark 13, Jesus was teaching about his return. In verse 34, he gave them a comparison. He said, "It's like a man going away. He leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. The owner is leaving. Before he goes, he organizes everything. Every servant gets a specific job. They all have responsibilities. But there's one servant with a special job, the doorkeeper. His task is to watch, stay alert, be ready for the master's return." Jesus explained why in verse 35, "Therefore keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight or when the rooster crows or at dawn. There are 4 watches of the night. Evening, midnight, late night, and dawn." The point is clear. It could be any time. You don't know which watch he'll return in, so you have to be alert through all of them. Verse 36 gives the warning, "If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping." Imagine being the doorkeeper and the master finds you asleep. You had one job: stay awake, watch, be ready. Then verse 37, Jesus broadened it. "What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch." This isn't just for one person. This is for everyone. Watch, stay alert, be ready. An expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. In Luke 10 verse 25 he asked, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" It was a loaded question, one designed to trap Jesus or make him look foolish. But Jesus answered his question with another question, the way he often did. "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" Jesus turned it back on him. "You're an expert. You tell me what the scriptures say." The man replied in verse 27, quoting from the law, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." He got it exactly right. Jesus told him, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. Simple, clear, love God completely. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do that and you'll have eternal life." But the man wanted to justify himself. He wanted to narrow down the requirements, to find the limits. So verse 29 says he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" He was looking for boundaries, for who counted and who didn't. Who do I actually have to love? Who can I ignore? Jesus answered him with a story that would completely blow apart his categories. He said in verse 30, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. This was a real road, a dangerous road. Everyone listening knew it. The road dropped about 3,000 feet in 17 miles, full of rocks and caves where robbers could hide. The man in the story was traveling alone, which was risky. The robbers attacked him." Verse 30 continues, "They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. They took everything, his clothes, his money, his dignity. They beat him until he couldn't fight back, then left him there bleeding on the side of the road. He was dying." Verse 31 says, "A priest happened to be going down the same road." A priest, someone who served in the temple, someone who knew God's law inside and out. When he saw the man lying there, he passed by on the other side. He didn't stop. He didn't check if the man was alive. He deliberately crossed to the other side of the road to avoid getting close. Maybe he had his reasons. Maybe he was worried about becoming ceremonially unclean if the man was dead. Maybe he was afraid the robbers were still around. Whatever his reasons, he walked away. Then verse 32 tells us a Levite came to the place. Another religious person, someone who served in the temple, someone who assisted the priests. When he saw the man, he also passed by on the other side. He did exactly what the priest did. Saw the need, chose to avoid it, kept walking. Two religious leaders, two people who should have known better, two people who did nothing, but then a Samaritan came along. Verse 33 says, as he traveled, he came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. This is the shocking part of the story. Jews and Samaritans hated each other. They had centuries of bad blood between them. Jews considered Samaritans half-breeds, heretics, enemies. They wouldn't associate with them, wouldn't eat with them, wouldn't even walk through their territory if they could avoid it. But this Samaritan, this enemy, stopped. Verse 34 tells us exactly what he did. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Oil and wine were used for treating injuries. The oil soothed, the wine cleaned and disinfected. This Samaritan used his own supplies, his own resources to help. Then he put the man on his own donkey. That meant the Samaritan had to walk. He brought him to an inn and took care of him. He didn't just drop him off, he stayed. He personally cared for this wounded stranger through the night. The next day, verse 35 says, he took out 2 denarii, 2 days' wages. That's not spare change. That's significant money. He gave them to the innkeeper and said, look after him, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. He didn't just pay for one night. He promised to cover whatever it cost. He made himself responsible for this man's full recovery. He would come back and settle the account, no matter how much it ended up being. Then Jesus asked the expert in the law a pointed question in verse 36. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? It wasn't a difficult question. The answer was obvious. The expert replied, the one who had mercy on him. He couldn't even bring himself to say, the Samaritan. The word stuck in his throat, but he had to admit the truth. Jesus told him in verse 37, go and do likewise. Stop asking who your neighbor is. Go be a neighbor to whoever needs help. Jesus was teaching his disciples about prayer. In Luke 11 verse 5, he said to them, suppose you have a friend, and you go to him at midnight and say, friend, lend me 3 loaves of bread. Picture this scene. It's midnight, the middle of the night. Everyone in town is asleep. The streets are dark and empty. But you have a problem, and you're knocking on your friend's door. Verse 6 explains why you're there at such an inappropriate hour. A friend of mine on a journey has come to me, and I have no food to offer him. This wasn't about you being hungry. You had a guest, someone who'd traveled to see you, and in that culture, hospitality was everything. You didn't just welcome guests. You fed them. It was your duty, your honor, but your cupboards were empty. You had nothing to give. So you went to your friend's house in the middle of the night because you had no other option. You start knocking on the door. Verse 7 gives the friend's response from inside the house. Don't bother me. The door is already locked, and my children and I are in bed. I can't get up and give you anything. Everything about this response makes perfect sense. It's the middle of the night. The whole family is sleeping. In those small houses, everyone slept in the same room. Getting up would wake the children. The door was already locked and bolted, which took some effort to secure. Coming to answer it would be a hassle. It's unreasonable to ask this. Come back in the morning, but you don't stop knocking. You keep at it. You need that bread. Your guest needs food. You're not going away. Verse 8 says, I tell you, even though he will not get up and give you the bread because of friendship, yet because of your shameless audacity, he will surely get up and give you as much as you need. The friend inside doesn't get up because he wants to help. He doesn't get up because of your friendship. He gets up because the knocking won't stop. Your persistence, your shameless boldness, your refusal to go away, that's what makes him finally get out of bed, unbolt the door, and give you what you need. Jesus was invited to eat at the house of a prominent Pharisee on the Sabbath. People were watching him closely. In Luke 14, verse 7, he noticed something about the other guests. He saw how they picked the places of honor at the table. Everyone wanted to sit as close to the host as possible. The best seats, the most important positions. People were jockeying for status, trying to position themselves above others. So Jesus told them a parable about humility. Verse 8 records what he said. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. Think about what happens in that situation. You sit down in the best seat, feeling good about yourself, thinking you deserve to be there. Then someone more important walks in. Verse 9 says, if so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this person your seat. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. Picture that moment. Everyone at the dinner is watching. The host walks up to you and asks you to move. You have to stand up, gather your things, and walk to the lowest seat in the house while everyone watches. The embarrassment would be crushing. Everyone would see that you thought too highly of yourself. Everyone would see you being put in your place. The humiliation would be complete and public. Jesus offered a different approach in verse 10, but when you are invited, take the lowest place so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. Start at the bottom, sit in the worst seat. Then if the host wants to honor you, he can invite you to move higher. And when that happens, everyone sees the host honoring you. You don't have to promote yourself. Let someone else lift you up. Then verse 11 gives the principle behind the story. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. It's a pattern that shows up throughout Scripture. When you try to lift yourself up, you get knocked down. When you humble yourself, God lifts you up. Someone at the table with Jesus made a comment. He said in Luke 14, verse 15, blessed is the one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God. He was probably feeling pretty good about himself, assuming he'd be at that feast. So Jesus replied with a parable that would challenge that assumption. He said in verse 16, a certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. This was going to be a major event, not a small dinner, a great banquet. Lots of food, lots of guests. Everything was being prepared. Invitations had gone out well in advance. People knew it was coming. At the time of the banquet, verse 17 says, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, come, for everything is now ready. This was the custom. You'd receive an invitation ahead of time. Then a servant would come when everything was prepared to tell you it was time. The food was on the table. The celebration was beginning. Come now, but something unexpected happened. They all alike began to make excuses. Every single person who'd been invited suddenly had a reason they couldn't come. The first one said in verse 18, I have just bought a field, and I must go and see it. Please excuse me. He'd bought property and needed to inspect it. The second said in verse 19, I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me. He had new livestock to test. Another said in verse 20, I just got married, so I can't come. Each person had something they considered more important than the banquet. The servant came back and reported all this to his master. The owner of the house became angry. Verse 21 says he ordered his servant, go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. If the invited guests wouldn't come, he'd fill his house with people who had nothing, people who never expected an invitation to a great banquet, people who would be thrilled and grateful for the meal. The servant did what he was told. Then he came back and said in verse 22, Sir, what you ordered has been done, but there is still room. The house still wasn't full. There was space for more. So verse 23 records the master's next instruction. Go out to the roads and country lanes and compel them to come in, so that my house will be full. Go beyond the town. Go to the highways where travelers walk. Go to the country lanes. Find people out there and make them come. Insist. Persuade them. Fill every seat in my house. Then verse 24 gives the master's final declaration. I tell you, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet. The door was closed to the original guests. They had their chance, and they refused it. Now they were shut out. In Luke 18 verse 1, Jesus told his disciples a parable specifically to show them that they should always pray and not give up. Prayer requires persistence. It requires refusing to quit. So Jesus told them about a judge and a widow. He said in verse 2, "In a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared what people thought." This judge had no accountability to anyone. He didn't care about God's opinion. He didn't care what people in the town thought of him. He didn't fear consequences. He just did whatever he wanted. That's a dangerous person to have in power. Verse 3 introduces a widow in that same town who kept coming to him with the same plea over and over. "Grant me justice against my adversary." She had a legal case. Someone had wronged her, cheated her, taken advantage of her. She needed the judge to rule in her favor, to give her justice. But she had no power, no influence, no money to bribe him with, no connections to pressure him. She was a widow, which meant she was vulnerable and alone in that society. For some time, verse 4 says, he refused. He ignored her. He dismissed her case. He didn't care about her problem, but she kept coming. She wouldn't give up. She wouldn't go away. Finally, he said to himself, "Even though I don't fear God or care what people think, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice, so that she won't eventually come and attack me." Verse 5 in some translations has different wording. Some say, "Wear me out" instead of "attack me." The Greek phrase literally means, "give me a black eye." Whether it's physical or metaphorical, the point is clear. Her constant coming was exhausting him. She was beating him down with her persistence. He couldn't get rid of her. Finally, just to make her stop, just to get some peace, he gave her what she needed. He granted her justice, not because he cared about what was right, but because she wouldn't leave him alone. Then Jesus made the application in verse 6. He said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. Pay attention to this. If even an unjust judge who doesn't care about God or people will eventually give justice to someone who keeps asking, what does that tell you about God?" Verse 7 asks, "And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off?" God isn't like that judge. God actually cares. God actually wants to help his people. Verse 8 says, "I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly." Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." There was a family dispute over money, and this person wanted Jesus to take his side. But Jesus refused to get involved in their argument. Instead, he used it as an opportunity to teach. In Luke 12, verse 15, he said to everyone listening, "Watch out! Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable to illustrate the point. Verse 16 says, "The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest." Notice that the text doesn't say he worked harder or was smarter than other farmers. The ground just produced. It was a good year. But this abundance created a problem for him. He had so much grain he didn't have anywhere to put it all. Verse 17 records him thinking to himself, talking it through. "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he came up with a solution. Verse 18 says, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain." He'd demolish his current storage and build new, larger barns. That would solve the space problem. But he didn't stop there. Verse 19 records the rest of his plan. "And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." His whole plan revolved around himself. Count how many times he says "I" and "my" in these verses. My crops, my barns, my grain, I will do this. I will say to myself. He was talking to himself, planning for himself, storing up for himself. He thought he had everything figured out. Years and years of security. Time to relax and enjoy life. But God had a different perspective. God said to him in verse 20, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?" He didn't have years. He didn't even have days. He had hours. That very night, he would die. All his planning, all his building, all his storing up was for nothing. He was about to leave it all behind, and someone else would get everything he'd accumulated. Jesus concluded the parable in verse 21 with a sobering statement. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. In Luke 16, verse 19, Jesus said, "There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day." Purple dye was incredibly expensive, made from thousands of crushed sea snails. Only the very wealthy could afford purple clothing. Fine linen was imported, the best quality fabric available. This man had serious wealth and he displayed it. He lived in luxury every single day, not just on special occasions. Every day was a feast. Verse 20 says at his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus. This is the only parable where Jesus gives a character a name. Lazarus was covered with sores, painful open wounds all over his body. He was longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Not the food on the table, the scraps that fell to the floor. That's all he wanted. Even the dogs came and licked his sores, which would have made him ceremonially unclean and added to his misery. Here's what's important. Lazarus wasn't somewhere across town. He was at the rich man's gate, right there. The rich man saw him every single time he went in or out of his house. You can't miss someone lying at your gate. The rich man stepped over him or around him daily. He saw the sores. He saw the hunger. He did nothing. The time came when the beggar died, verse 22 says, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. Abraham's side was another way of saying paradise, the place of honor and comfort. Lazarus, who had nothing on earth, who suffered every day, was honored in death. Carried by angels to the place of blessing, the rich man also died and was buried. His funeral was probably elaborate. Lots of mourners, expensive preparations. But verse 23 says in Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away, with Lazarus by his side. Now the positions were reversed. Lazarus was being comforted. The rich man was suffering. He called out in verse 24, "Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire. Even now, even in torment, he was treating Lazarus like a servant. Send Lazarus to help me." He wasn't asking to leave. He wasn't asking for much. Just a drop of water. Just a moment of relief. The suffering was that intense, but Abraham replied in verse 25, "Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things, but now he is comforted here and you are in agony. Remember." Think back. You had everything. Lazarus had nothing. Now the situations are reversed. Then verse 26 adds another reality. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. Even if someone wanted to help, they couldn't. The separation was permanent and uncrossable. The rich man realized nothing could be done for him. The suffering wouldn't end. So verse 27 records him saying, "Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. If he couldn't be helped, maybe his brothers could be saved from the same fate." If they knew what was waiting, surely they'd change how they lived. Abraham answered in verse 29, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. They have the scriptures. They have God's word. They have warning already." The rich man argued in verse 30, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent." A miracle would convince them. Seeing someone come back from death would change everything. But Abraham said in verse 31, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." In Luke 16 verse 1, Jesus told his disciples about a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. Someone reported that the manager was mishandling the master's resources, squandering them. The owner called him in and said in verse 2, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. You're fired. Turn in your books. Explain everything. Your time here is done." The manager said to himself in verse 3, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg." He was facing a crisis. He needed a plan fast. Manual labor wasn't an option. He didn't have the physical strength for it. Begging was humiliating. He couldn't bring himself to do that. So what could he do? Verse 4 says, "I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." He came up with a plan, a shrewd, calculated plan. He called in each person who owed his master something. He asked the first one in verse 5, "How much do you owe my master?" The man replied, 900 gallons of olive oil. That's a huge amount. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly and make it 450. Cut it in half. Pay half of what you owe." Then verse 7 says, he asked another debtor, "And how much do you owe?" He replied, 1,000 bushels of wheat, another massive debt. The manager told him, "Take your bill and make it 800, reduced by 20%. He went through his master's debtors one by one, significantly reducing what they owed. These people would be thrilled. They would be grateful. They would remember who helped them. And when the manager lost his job, they'd be happy to return the favor. Verse 8 says something surprising. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. The master wasn't praising the dishonesty. He wasn't saying it was right to cheat him. He was acknowledging the cleverness. The manager saw his situation clearly, understood what was coming, and took decisive action to secure his future. Then Jesus made a statement. "For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light." Worldly people are often smarter about planning for their future than believers are about spiritual things. Verse 9 continues with Jesus' application. "I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings." Use money wisely. Use it to build relationships. Use it for eternal purposes. Then Jesus made several points about faithfulness. Verse 10 says, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much." How you handle small things shows how you'll handle big things. Character shows up in the details. Verse 11 asks a pointed question. "So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches?" If you can't handle money properly, why would God trust you with spiritual riches? And verse 12 continues, "And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own?" Everything we have belongs to God. We're just managers. If we mismanage what He's given us, why would He give us more? Then Jesus concluded in verse 13 with a statement that cuts to the heart of the matter. "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. You have to choose. Money will demand your loyalty. God demands your loyalty. You can't give both your full allegiance." Jesus was teaching about the kingdom of God using parables. The crowds were gathered around him, listening to story after story. In Mark 4, verse 21, he asked them a question that seemed obvious at first, the kind of question where the answer is so clear you wonder why he's even asking. He said to them, "Do you bring in a lamp to put it under a bowl or a bed? Instead, don't you put it on its stand?" Think about that for a moment. Picture yourself in a dark house at night. You light a lamp. The flame flickers to life. Now what do? Do you immediately cover it with a bowl? Do you shove it under your bed? Of course not. That would be ridiculous. That would defeat the entire purpose of lighting it. The whole point of a lamp is to give light, to push back the darkness, to let you see. You put it somewhere high, somewhere visible, somewhere central, so it can light up the whole room. You put it on a lampstand where it does the most good. Then Jesus explained why this obvious truth matters in verse 22. "For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open." This is a principle about how God works. Things that are hidden now won't stay hidden forever. Secrets will eventually come out. Truth will be revealed. Nothing stays buried permanently. Everything eventually comes to light. What's done in darkness will be exposed in the light. Verse 23 records Jesus saying something he said often throughout his teaching, a phrase that showed up again and again. If anyone has ears to hear, let them hear. It's a call to attention. It's saying this matters. Don't just listen with your ears and let the words bounce off. Really hear what's being said. Let it sink in. Let it change you. Then verse 24 continues with another principle. Consider carefully what you hear, he told them. Pay attention. Think about it. Don't be passive. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you, and even more. The standard you apply to others will be applied to you. The way you judge will be the way you're judged. But there's more. Verse 25 adds, whoever has will be given more. Whoever does not have, even what they have, will be taken from them. The principle is clear and consistent with other things Jesus taught. If you use what you're given, you'll receive more. If you respond to the light you have, more light will come. If you take the truth you know and live by it, share it, act on it, you'll grow in understanding. But if you ignore it, if you hide it, if you refuse to use it, even the little you have will be taken away. Light unused becomes darkness. Truth ignored becomes deception. John's disciples came to Jesus with a question that had been bothering them. They'd noticed something about how Jesus and his disciples lived, and it didn't match what they were used to. They fasted often. The Pharisees fasted often, but Jesus' disciples didn't seem to fast at all. Why was that? What made them different? Jesus gave them an answer, and then he told two short parables to make his point even clearer. In Matthew 9, verse 16, Jesus said, "No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, making the tear worse." This was common sense to anyone who worked with fabric, to anyone who'd ever tried to repair clothing. Everyone listening would have understood immediately. If you take new cloth that hasn't been washed yet, cloth that hasn't shrunk yet, and you sew it onto an old garment to cover a hole, what happens the first time you wash it? The new patch shrinks. It pulls tight. It tears away from the old fabric around it. And instead of fixing the tear, you've made it bigger. You've created a worse problem than you started with. You've ruined the garment even more. Then verse 17 gives the second image, another everyday illustration that made perfect sense to his audience. Neither do people pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst. The wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved. Wineskins were made from animal hide, usually goat skin. When wine is first made, it's still fermenting. It's active. It expands. It gives off gases. It puts pressure on whatever contains it. New wineskins were flexible. They had stretch to them. They could handle that pressure. They could expand as the wine fermented. But old wineskins had already been stretched. They'd already held wine. They'd already been through the fermentation process once. They were brittle now. They'd lost their flexibility. They couldn't stretch anymore. Pour new wine into old wineskins, and the pressure would burst them. The skins would split open. You'd lose the wine, it would pour out onto the ground, and you'd destroy the wineskins too. You'd lose everything. So what do? You pour new wine into new wineskins. That way both are preserved. The wine ferments safely, and the wineskins do their job without breaking. Jesus was making a point about what he was bringing to the world. His teaching, his way, his kingdom, his new covenant. It wasn't just a patch on the old religious system. It wasn't something you could fit into the old structures. It wasn't about following the same rules better or being more devoted to the same practices. It required something new. New hearts, new ways of thinking, new containers, new wineskins for new wine. Peter came to Jesus with a question about forgiveness that had probably been on his mind for a while. In Matthew 18, verse 21, he asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times. You can hear in the question that Peter thought he was being really generous here. The religious teachers of his day said you had to forgive someone 3 times. 3 strikes and you're out. After that, you were done. You'd fulfilled your obligation. But Peter was willing to go further. 7 times seemed really gracious, way beyond what was required. Jesus answered him in verse 22, and his answer must have shocked Peter. I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Some translations say 70 times 7, which would be 490 times. Either way, the point was the same. Jesus wasn't giving a new number to count to. He wasn't saying keep track until you hit 77 and then you're done. He was saying stop counting altogether. Stop keeping track. Stop putting limits on forgiveness. Stop asking when you've done enough. This is the same teaching Jesus gave when he told the parable of the unmerciful servant earlier, the one who was forgiven millions but wouldn't forgive thousands. But Peter's question here shows why this teaching is so important. It's because we naturally want limits. We want to know when we're done. We want to know when we've forgiven enough. We want to know when we're justified in holding a grudge. But Jesus says there's no limit. You keep forgiving every single time, no matter how many times someone hurts you, no matter how many times they do the same thing. You forgive. Why? Because that's how God forgives you. God doesn't keep count. God doesn't say, I've forgiven you 3 times for that. Now you're on your own. God's forgiveness is unlimited, endless, always available. And since you've received that kind of forgiveness, that's the kind of forgiveness you give to others. Jesus was hungry. It was early morning and he hadn't eaten yet. In Matthew 21, verse 18, as he was on his way back to the city, he felt the hunger. He saw a fig tree by the road, standing there with its leaves visible from a distance. So he went up to it, expecting to find some fruit to eat. Verse 19 says he found nothing on it except leaves. Just leaves, no figs, no fruit at all. Just a tree that looked healthy from far away, but had nothing to offer when you got close. So Jesus said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." He spoke directly to the tree, cursing it. And immediately, right there in front of the disciples, the tree withered. The leaves dried up. The branches died. The whole tree went from looking alive to completely dead in moments. The disciples saw this happen right in front of them. They were walking with Jesus. They'd seen him approach the tree. They'd heard him speak to it, and now they watched it die. Verse 20 says, when they saw it, they were amazed. They were shocked. They asked, how did the fig tree wither so quickly? They just watched a living tree become a dead tree in seconds. That got their attention. They wanted to understand what had just happened. Jesus replied in verse 21, but his answer wasn't really about the tree. Truly, I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but also you can say to this mountain, go, throw yourself into the sea, and it will be done. The point wasn't about killing trees. The point was about faith and what faith can do. With faith, real faith, faith without doubt mixed in, you can do things that seem impossible. You can speak to mountains and they'll move. You can command things and they'll obey. Verse 22 makes it even clearer and more direct. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer. Faith and prayer go together. They're connected. Believing prayer is powerful prayer. Prayer filled with doubt doesn't accomplish much. But prayer filled with faith moves mountains. The tree withered because Jesus spoke to it with complete authority and faith. Mountains move when that kind of faith speaks. Jesus was teaching in the temple courts. The chief priests and elders had just challenged his authority, demanding to know who gave him the right to teach and do what he was doing. Jesus answered their question with a question, and they couldn't answer him. Now he was telling them parables. And these parables were hitting very close to home. In Matthew 21, verse 33, he said, listen to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard. This landowner didn't just buy land and leave it empty. He invested in it. He developed it. He put a wall around it to protect it from animals and thieves. He dug a wine press in it so the grapes could be processed right there. He built a watchtower so someone could watch for thieves and for the right time to harvest. He did everything necessary to make this vineyard productive and successful. Then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and moved to another place. He entrusted it to tenants who would work it and give him his share of the crop. Time passed. The vineyard grew. The grapes ripened. Verse 34 says, when the harvest time approached, he sent his servants to the tenants to collect his fruit. He wasn't asking for all of it. He wasn't being unreasonable, just his share. What was rightfully his, according to their agreement. But the tenants refused. More than refused. They attacked. They seized his servants. Verse 35 tells us they beat one servant. They killed another one. They stoned a third. They violently rejected the messengers who came to collect what belonged to the owner. This was rebellion. This was theft. This was violence, so the owner tried again. Verse 36 says he sent other servants to them, more than the first time. Surely they wouldn't attack more servants. Surely they'd realize this was serious. But the tenants treated them the same way. More beatings, more killings, more violence, more rejection. The owner had one option left. Last of all, verse 37 says he sent his son to them. His own son, his heir. They will respect my son, he thought. Surely they wouldn't dare harm his son. The son represented the owner himself. The son had the owner's full authority. They'd have to listen to him. But verse 38 records what the tenants said when they saw the son coming. This is the heir. Come, let's kill him and take his inheritance. They saw an opportunity. They thought if they killed the heir, if they eliminated the rightful owner, they could keep the vineyard for themselves. They could claim it as their own. So that's exactly what they did. They seized him, verse 39 says. They threw him out of the vineyard, and they killed him. They murdered the owner's son. Then Jesus asked them a direct question in verse 40. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? What's the appropriate response to this kind of rebellion and murder? They answered without realizing they were condemning themselves. Verse 41 records what they said. He will bring those wretches to a wretched end, and he will rent the vineyard to other tenants, who will give him his share of the crop at harvest time. They knew exactly what justice required. The wicked tenants would be destroyed. The vineyard would be given to others who would actually do what they were supposed to do. Jesus said to them in verse 42, have you never read in the scriptures, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. He was quoting from Psalm 118, and every religious leader there knew exactly what he was saying. The stone that was thrown away, rejected as useless, became the most important stone in the building. Then, verse 43 makes the application explicit and unavoidable. Therefore I tell you that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people who will produce its fruit. You had your chance. You rejected God's messengers. You're about to reject God's Son, so the kingdom will be taken from you and given to others. Verse 45 says, when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard Jesus' parables, they knew he was talking about them. They understood perfectly. They were the wicked tenants. They'd rejected the prophets, and they were about to reject Jesus. The parable was their story. Jesus was still in the temple, still talking to the chief priests and elders, still challenging their assumptions about who was righteous and who wasn't. In Matthew 21, verse 28, he asked them, what do you think? There was a man who had 2 sons. He went to the first and said, son, go and work today in the vineyard. A simple request. A father asking his son to work? Nothing complicated, nothing unusual. Just a dad telling his kid to go do some work that needed to be done. Verse 29 gives the first son's response, and it's shockingly direct. He answered, I will not. Flat refusal. No excuses. No explanation. No trying to soften it. Just no, I don't want to. I'm not going to. Leave me alone. But something changed. Later the verse says he changed his mind and went. Maybe he felt guilty. Maybe he thought about it and realized he was being selfish. Maybe he just came to his senses. Whatever happened inside him, the result was he ended up doing what his father asked, even though his first response was refusal. The father went to the other son with the same request. Verse 30 says, this son answered, I will, sir. He was respectful. He was polite. He agreed immediately. He said all the right things. He looked like the obedient son, the good son, the one who honored his father. But there's a problem. The verse continues, but he did not go. He said yes. He made a promise. He gave his word. And then he completely ignored it. He never showed up. He never did the work. His words were empty. Jesus asked them a direct question in verse 31. Which of the two did what his father wanted? It wasn't a hard question. It wasn't a trick. The answer was obvious to everyone there. They replied, the first. The son who initially said no but then actually did the work, who actually showed up and worked in the vineyard. That's the one who truly obeyed his father. Obedience is about what you do, not what you say. Then Jesus applied this parable directly to them, and his words must have cut deep. He told them, truly I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you. Tax collectors and prostitutes. The worst people in society, the ones everyone looked down on, the ones no religious person would associate with. Those people are getting into God's kingdom before you religious leaders. How could that be? Verse 32 explains exactly why. For John came to you to show you the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him, but the tax collectors and the prostitutes did. And even after you saw this, you did not repent and believe him. John the Baptist came preaching repentance. He showed them the right path. The religious leaders heard him but didn't believe him. They said they followed God, but they rejected God's messenger. They were like the second son, all talk, no action. But the tax collectors and prostitutes, the obvious sinners, the people living in open rebellion against God, they heard John and believed. They repented. They changed their lives. They were like the first son. They'd been living in disobedience, but when they heard the truth, they responded. They actually changed, and that's what matters. Jesus was traveling through towns and villages, teaching as he made his way toward Jerusalem. People were following him, listening to him teach, asking him questions. In Luke 13, verse 22, someone in the crowd asked him a theological question, the kind of thing religious people like to debate. Lord, are only a few people going to be saved? It's an interesting question. The person wanted to know about numbers, about percentages, about how exclusive or inclusive salvation would be. But Jesus didn't give a theological answer. He didn't give statistics. He didn't debate the question. Instead, he gave a very personal, very practical response. Verse 24 records what he said. Make every effort to enter through the narrow door, because many, I tell you, will try to enter and will not be able to. Stop worrying about how many other people will be saved. Stop trying to figure out the numbers. Focus on yourself. Make sure you get through the door. And understand this, it's narrow. It's not wide open. It requires effort. It requires intention. It requires actually doing what's necessary. And many people who try to get in, who think they'll get in, will fail. Then Jesus described a scene, painting a picture of what will happen one day. Verse 25 says, once the owner of the house gets up and closes the door, you will stand outside knocking and pleading, Sir, open the door for us. There's a time limit. The door won't stay open forever. There's a point when it closes. Eventually, the owner gets up and shuts it. He locks it. And once it's shut, it stays shut. No more chances. No more opportunities. People will be outside, desperately knocking, begging to be let in. But the time for entering will be over. The owner's response comes next. But he will answer, I don't know you or where you come from. This is shocking. These people expected to get in. They thought they had a right to enter. But the owner says he doesn't know them. There's no relationship. There's no recognition. Verse 26 gives what these people will say when they hear this. Then you will say, we ate and drank with you and you taught in our streets. They'll argue. They'll claim association with Jesus. They knew him. They were around him. They heard him teach. They saw him in their town. They maybe even shared meals with him or were at events where he was present. Surely that counts for something. Surely proximity to Jesus, exposure to his teaching, being in the same place as him, surely that's enough. But verse 27 says, he will reply with devastating words. I don't know you or where you come from. Away from me, all you evildoers. It doesn't matter that they were around Jesus. It doesn't matter that they heard him teach. Knowing about Jesus isn't the same as knowing Jesus. Being near him isn't the same as belonging to him. And he calls them evildoers. Despite their claims, despite their protests, they're living in evil. They never truly repented. They never truly followed. Verse 28 describes their reaction when they realize what's happened. There will be weeping there, and gnashing of teeth when you see Abraham, Isaac and Jacob and all the prophets in the kingdom of God, but you yourselves thrown out. The pain won't just be from being excluded. It will be from seeing others included. They'll see through the door or the windows. They'll see who made it. They'll see the feast, the celebration, the joy, and they'll realize they're outside, locked out, excluded. The grief and rage and regret will be unbearable. Then Jesus said something surprising in verse 29. People will come from east and west and north and south, and will take their places at the feast in the kingdom of God. People from everywhere. People from all directions. People you wouldn't expect. Gentiles, outsiders, people who weren't part of the original chosen nation. They'll be inside, seated at the feast, celebrating. Verse 30 concludes with a statement Jesus made often. Indeed, there are those who are last who will be first, and first who will be last. Everything will be reversed from what people expect. The people who thought they were guaranteed a spot will be outside. The people who seemed like they had no chance will be inside. Jesus had already taught about humility at this dinner, about not taking the best seat for yourself, but letting the host honor you. But he wasn't done teaching about hospitality and what it means to truly serve others. In Luke 14, verse 12, he turned to the man who had invited him to this meal, his host, and said something that must have surprised everyone at the table. When you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. This went completely against everything people understood about hospitality and social life. Of course you invite your friends and family. Of course you invite people you know. Of course you invite people in your social circle. That's what you do. That's normal. That's how society works. That's how you maintain relationships and build your network. But Jesus was challenging the entire system. He was pointing out something people didn't want to admit. When you invite people who can repay you, you're not really being generous. You're not really sacrificing anything. You're making an investment. You're playing a social game. You invite them to dinner. They invite you back. You help them, they help you. It's an exchange. It's a transaction. You get repaid in this life. There's nothing sacrificial about it. Verse 13 says, but when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Invite people who have nothing. People who can't host dinners at their homes. People who can't repay you with a return invitation. People who don't have the money, the social standing, the ability to do anything for you in return. People who will take from you, but can never give back. Verse 14 continues with the reason and the promise, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. You won't get repaid now. These people can't invite you to their homes because they don't have nice homes. They can't help your career because they have no influence. They can't boost your reputation because they have no status. They can't do anything for you in this world. In earthly terms, serving them costs you without any return, but God sees. God knows. And God will repay you. Not now, not in this life, but at the resurrection. Eternal reward instead of temporary payback. Treasure in heaven instead of favors on earth. This is a completely different economy, a completely different way of thinking about relationships and service and hospitality. Jesus was challenging the whole system of social climbing, of networking, of using relationships for personal gain. He was saying to stop calculating what you'll get back. Stop only serving people who can help you. Stop treating hospitality like a business transaction. Instead, serve people who offer you no earthly benefit. Serve people who can never repay you. Give without expecting anything in return, and trust God for the reward that matters. If this journey through Jesus' parables opened your eyes to something new, if it challenged you, if it changed how you see God's kingdom, then share this video with someone who needs to hear these truths. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more deep dives into Scripture. And leave a comment telling me which parable hit you the hardest. Remember, Jesus said, "Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear." You've heard. Now the question is, will you truly listen?